Once we had the Detroit Speed subframe assembled for our '69 Camaro called Lose Change, the next challenge was to put the engine in the subframe and put the subframe on the car and make sure that everything was going to fit. The reason why we were concerned is this engine is called an LSA, and it's a supercharged engine that came from General Motors. You'll find the same engine in the new ZL1 Camaro as well as the CTS-V Cadillac. And we know that the bottom end, which is basically a GM LS platform, those fit in these subframes and in these cars all day long. But the Supercharger adds a little bit of clearance issue because we weren't sure that the stock hood would fit over that Supercharger. So we bolted the subframe to the body of the car, and one thing we noticed is that the Detroit Speed spindles are very tall on this subframe, and the Wilwood brake package is very large in diameter, so we needed to get some large wheels just to roll this project around. And a cheap, easy way to get some 20-inch wheels is to get some takeoffs from a new Camaro. So we checked Craigslist and found a set of used stamped steel wheels from a new Camaro, came with tires, paid a couple $100. They look pretty ridiculous on the car as it's going together, but it just gives us that clearance on the spindle and eventually the brakes. Attaching the subframe to a Camaro is not a difficult task if you have the right tools. We used a combination of the lift and some jack stands and a jack to kind of put the two together. The Detroit Speed subframe uses the stock mount holes on the Camaro body, and you put some 5/8 bolts through the guide holes on the front of the Camaro's body and line it up to the holes on the chassis, and everything lines up real easily. So bolting that up was not a very big challenge. To make sure the engine fit, we wanted to make it as complete as possible, so we bolted up a set of Detroit Speed headers to the engine, and we know that these fit the engine block no problem, and they're designed to fit the Detroit Speed subframe, so we weren't anticipating any issues around steering or anything like that, and we were very much relieved to see that the headers fit perfectly. There's plenty of clearance on both sides. They look great, they're a stainless piece, so we can check that off. We've got a success there. But our bigger concern, again, was hood clearance. So once the engine was in place, we all kind of looked and checked and eyeballed, and so far we didn't see any big headaches coming. So the crew put the front sheet metal back on the Camaro, the core support, fenders, and of course the hood. One change we did make to our engine is we're using the ZL1 type supercharger outlet, which is different from what the LSA comes with. The LSA comes with a shorter supercharger hat and a charge cooler that has ports facing the windshield. We put the ZL1 supercharger hat on, which puts the coolant ports facing forward and also adds just a little bit of height to the supercharger. And we were very relieved to find that the hood, a stock SS hood, closed and cleared the supercharger. The stock hood has a structure cut out that's designed to house the original air filter, and the supercharger hat just kind of tucks right up in there. So the whole crew breathed a sigh of relief to know that the engine physically fit in the car.
We're trying to figure out a system to mount this AC compressor in this location on this engine, which is something, to the best of our knowledge, that hasn't been done before, because this being the LSA instead of an LS9, it's a matter of figuring out the belt configuration to go along with the AC compressor, and this having multiple belts where an LS9 has a single belt. It's proving to be a little more difficult than typical installation.
So we are aware of several other cars that have supercharged GM LS type engines in them, and one of them that we're looking to for inspiration is the Red Devil car built by Mark Stilo. He had put a notch in his subframe to accommodate that AC compressor. So we looked through his book called Pro Touring Engineered Performance as kind of a cheat sheet to see what he did. His engine's a little bit different. It's an LS7 bottom with an LS9 supercharger, which does have a different belt drive assembly, and we just determined that we were going to have to make something. So we called upon our fabricator, John, to make a notch and some brackets to get that AC compressor to fit. It's kind of interesting to note that the GM air conditioning compressor design on an LSA engine is not adjustable. You put the belt on and you can't move that compressor in or out. So we wanted to add some adjustability and have a clean install. And John first measured everything out and made a pocket in the subframe and then began to design the brackets to hold it in place. The end result is a bracket system that uses spherical rod ends to adjust belt tension and a pocket in the subframe that follows the lines of the engine mount and really looks like it belongs. Another challenge on the bracketry system on this car was the addition of a power steering reservoir that allowed for multiple returns. We were going to use a single return from the power steering system itself, and we needed another power steering fluid return for the hydraulic brake assist unit. And this engine package comes from the factory with, it appears to be a nylon or a plastic power steering pump reservoir, and it's mounted right on the pump. And the problem with that is we don't know of a good way to attach a fitting onto that to have a separate additional return without it cracking or leaking. And we didn't want to put a T-fitting because we wanted optimum flow for that return fluid. So we learned that Jones Racing Products makes a fabricated aluminum power steering reservoir that is a really nice looking piece, and it comes with 2 ports already machined into the side so we can attach our second line. But the problem is the LSA power steering pump is a GM Type 2 pump in its basic design, but it doesn't interchange with, say, the Corvette pump or the other GM Type 2 pumps with regards to the reservoir. It's got a different style of mounting. So we had to do a little work to put a Corvette style pump on this engine so that we could put the Jones reservoir on. But once we did, we got everything to fit nice, and now we can accommodate our second power steering return. There's detailed photos of this process on our website at v8tvshow.com/losechange. The next aspect of this engine install is the position of the controlling system. And this is a GM crate assembly that came with an electronic controller that manages the engine functions and fuel injection. And it comes with a very nice looking package. It's got a fuse panel and a relay panel in a box. It's all labeled up. It's hardwired together. So we didn't want to cut any of those wires up because it only has exactly what it needs to run. And it's a certain length. And we wanted to try and see if we could position that controller in the body somewhere without having to cut and lengthen any wires. And what we found is the 69 Camaro has a nice area where the ashtray goes. The owner of this car is a non-smoker and he probably doesn't want anybody smoking in the car. So we removed the ashtray assembly and made a bracket to mount our ECM relay center in the dash. And then the electronic controller itself is going to mount in the dash above the glove box so that all of the electronics will be out of the elements. And we only need one hole in the firewall to run the whole harness out to the engine to make all the power connections and connections for the sensors and fuel injectors and all the rest. So it's really turning out to be a clean install for all the electronic parts. Our last question that we have with this is ground clearance with the oil pan. The factory oil pan that comes on this engine is hanging just below the cross member, and we wanted to gain as much clearance as possible. So we will be installing a Holley Oil Pan, which is designed for LS engine swaps, and it's a really trick piece. It's cast aluminum, and it looks like it came out of General Motors. It's a high quality casting, but it's got a shorter sump so that it doesn't hang quite as low, but it still provides adequate oil supply for this engine, which is going to be making upwards of 600 horsepower when this thing's all said and done. Next time, we'll show you how we fit the T56 Magnum 6-speed manual transmission from Modern Driveline.